Today we're going to continue our conversation about digital advertising. And in particular, we're going to discuss the different payment forms that you should expect and also some tools that you should be aware of that will help you manage your advertising campaigns online. So let's start with payment methods. We have discussed some of these over the different conversations we have had, but let me go a little bit into more detail. The first type of payment method that you can expect to find in some advertising forms online is this idea of cost per thousand or cost per mille, which basically means cost per each 1,000 impressions, meaning 1,000 times where the ad is being shown, theoretically at least, to a person. Right. So the way you compute it is pretty simple. How much it costs the campaign divided by the total number of impressions, and that's going to give you the cost per 1,000 basically. So, well, divided by total multiplied by 1,000. Now, one thing that you need to be aware of when it comes down to this is obviously this kind of goal is well aligned if you're interested in increasing awareness. So depending on what your goal is, some of these are going to be more appealing from an advertiser perspective than others, and maybe you should gravitate towards opportunities that actually offer a form of payment that actually aligns with what you're trying to achieve. Okay, and what's going to happen is depending on how quickly your ad loads, you might actually have an easier time doing this or not. Like we're going to see in the next version, which is viewable cost per 1,000. Not every ad that supposedly goes through the screen is going to be fully loaded. This is of particular limitation when you're talking about very media-rich ads, for example, video, or even if it's just an image, if you're dealing with an infrastructure where fast speeds for download are still not mainstream. So if you go to some countries where maybe the infrastructure is not like in the United States, for example. Okay, so because of this, instead of just looking at number of impressions, what some advertising partners will enable you to do is look at viewable ads. And what that means is they have a definition for when the impression is actually counted that is different than whether the page is loaded. And typically, although there are different definitions for different ad networks, and you need to be aware of this, you should look at the contract carefully. But typically, when you're talking about an image, the definition is that 50% of the image is loaded for at least 1 second. Okay, so not the entire image, but 50% of it. Okay. And again, this is going to be very infrastructure dependent. And if it is, if that's the case, if at least 50% of the image loads for 1 second or longer, then it will be counted as a viewable ad, and then it will count towards what you need to pay the ad carrier, let's say. Okay. On the other hand, if you have video, a typical definition will be that the video plays continuously, meaning without interruption, for at least 2 minutes. 2 seconds. No, definitely not 2 minutes. And again, this is considered viewable, right? And whether they actually view it or not, that's a different definitional issue, right? And again, typically VCPM is actually more favorable, typically, to the advertiser, that the company that is trying to do the advertising, because at least you have some sort of quality control as to whether the ad had an impression or not, although these definitions might be a little loose for some. And so as we move from here to here, we're starting to favor the brand that is advertising more than the network that is providing the advertising opportunity. But still, we are these kind of payment methods still favor more the advertising network than they actually favor the company that is trying to advertise. And you should be aware of all of them so that you understand which ones actually make more sense for you. And typically, if your budget is tighter, you will gravitate more towards this than you will towards this, because you have that filter that hopefully helps you get in more actual impressions as opposed to theoretical impressions. Other types of payment that, or forms of payment or models that you're going to find, cost per click, right? Now, as we're moving down the chain here, we're going to be move more and more to things that are favorable to the advertiser, and hence less to the company that is providing the advertising opportunity or the ad network. Now, notice that cost per click depends not only on whether the advertising is rendering properly, but also if the advertising is, let's say, enticing enough for somebody to click on it, right? So obviously the advertising network is going to be less pleased with this, because if the ad, let's just say, is not very appealing, or like they say in my country, if it sucks, then whether it sucks or not is beyond the control of the advertising network. So they might be more reluctant, let's say, to offer this option, because it doesn't only depend on how good their ad network is, it depends on also whether you build an appealing ad, right? So again, as you move to the clicks, you're moving closer to conversion, which, depending on where you are in terms of your goals, will be more appealing to you. So it's more appropriate for later stages of the consumer journey. One thing that you need to be aware of, though, is there are, let's just say, bad actors that might be incentivized to clicking in your ads, even though they have no intention of actually looking at your products. Like, for example, your competitors might be, if they are not very scrupulous, let's say, they might be incentivized to actually go and click in your ads just so that it costs you more money, even though they have no intention of buying your products. So what a lot of ad networks will do is they have some filters that enable them to check whether some sort of click fraud is actually happening. So if the same IP address is clicking on the ads over and over and over again, they might only count that as one click to limit the degree to which this click fraud is actually happening. Okay. And then similarly to cost per click, you have cost per action or cost per acquisition. And this is basically something that you need to define, like different ad networks are going to enable you to basically create some sort of way of tracking who is actually converted to maybe sales, right? So the definition is going to be something that you're going to be basically building specifically for your offerings. So for example, if you're a company that, I don't know, provides a video game in an app, and that's your product / service, well, in that situation, acquisition might be that somebody installs your app in their phone, right? On the other hand, if you're an e-tailer, maybe acquisition means that somebody signs up for being one of your customers and actually buys a product, right? So the definition, it's going to be company dependent, but you're going to have to work obviously with your ad network to make sure that the definition is clear and trackable, so that you can actually pay only for the customers that go completely through your sales cycle. Okay. Again, this is moving closer and closer to what is ideal for the advertiser, and of course what is less ideal for the advertising network. And the reason why is because now not only the ad needs to be appealing, but also all the processes associated with your store, for example, if that's what you have going for yourself, need to be in place and be proper and be well designed. And basically you need to do everything right to make sure that you get to the acquisition stage, which may be a lot harder and is definitely outside of the control of the advertising network. So the farther you remove control for the action from the advertising network, the less likely they are to offer this as an opportunity. So oftentimes what you will see is that CPA is only offered when you're doing affiliate marketing. That is when you're essentially working within a network that it's associated with the advertiser and is providing an opportunity for something that the advertiser actually controls, right? So, so you're going to find a lot of affiliate marketing, for example, in networks like Amazon, right? Where you might create your own Amazon store, and because Amazon knows how the whole process works, they might offer you affiliate marketing opportunities where you can basically market your store, right? In hopes that they are going to buy. And in that case, what you're doing is revenue sharing with Amazon because you pay a commission for the sales, right? So in a situation like that where there is revenue sharing and with both parties are incentivized to do a good job, then you might find opportunities for CPA. Otherwise, ad networks would not be willing to do this because obviously it's too dependent on you doing a good job for them to get paid. Okay. Other options, sometimes what you're going to find is you're going to have a flat rate, right? Some sort of fixed rate that you negotiate to actually have your ads in a particular digital real estate, let's say, okay? And these are not a priori based on performance, although oftentimes what will happen is there is some historical data that these prime networks or premium networks will basically know a priori what is their typical traffic, and they'll have a good idea about basically who is typically there, so they'll know their audience. And then based on their history, they will charge you a certain rate, right? So if their typically number of visitors per day is 2 million, they're going to charge you quite a bit more if the typical rate is 100,000 visitors. This is obvious, right? But it's typically not associated with direct performance like all the other metrics that we have discussed so far. And then lastly, and this is similar to CPA, we have CPE, which is cost per engagement. And again, this is going to be something that you're going to have to define within the advertising network so that it can be tracked using some sort of script, right? So engagement, it's going to be defined as some sort of action that the visitor or the consumer, or target consumer in our case, it's going to engage in, and based on that, you will get paid, right? So that could be sign up a form, that could be like a comment, that could be comment in a comment section, that could be share something with maybe one person, or maybe the number of shares if it's multiple shares, etc., etc. So you do not get to pay for impressions until they complete the engagement action, whatever is being agreed upon. Again, this is more favorable to the advertiser and to somewhat degree is outside of the purview of the advertising network, and because of that you might find less of these options, although this is quite common because some of these engagement metrics are simple enough that the threshold of crossing the engagement barrier is low enough that the advertising networks might actually be okay with it. Okay. Now let's discuss, although I've already mentioned most of this as we were talking about the different aspects or the different payment methods. Who is more likely to do what? Like we were mentioning, the early metrics that we have discussed, like CPM and VCPM, they favor the publisher. That means the ad network that is offering the advertising opportunity or space. Okay, why? Because you're going to pay regardless of whether people do something with the ad or not. So it's solely based on impressions. Further in this, even more, will be some sort of fixed rate where regardless of even the impressions, you pay a certain amount. So fixed rates and CPM and VCPM, they essentially favor the publisher. Okay, CPA and CPE, so either acquisition or engagement, is obviously going to favor the advertiser. Really depends on the definition of engagement, but acquisition will be probably downstream the furthest engagement metric, which goes beyond just what will be interest and desire to actual action, right? Yeah. So again, what you're typically going to find, although generalizations, there are exceptions to this, is that when you're looking for awareness type metrics or early in the customer journey, you're going to be focused mostly on CPM or VCPM metrics or fixed rate. And as you move down the sales funnel, you're going to be focused more on the ones that are looking at the specific actions, right? So it could be cost per leads, right? So if they actually sign up for your sign up sheet, you just count them, or it could be for installing an app, or it could be to actually buy the product like we were discussing, okay? And typically, although not always, is narrower focused websites are going to tend to use metrics like CPC. Okay. Now, where are you going to put these ads, right? That now we know what types of ads there are, and we've also discussed a little bit about how you're going to pay for these ads. There are different distribution models or methods that you're going to find online, and we're only going to touch on a few. There are more. Okay. First is premium book media. That will be a high traffic, broad interest website that has a lot of people going on a daily basis and all sort of different demographics. And what they do is they basically provide some of their digital real estate as an opportunity for advertising, right? So this is a very high profile space, and it's a premium space because it has such high traffic, okay? Typically, these premium book media options, which will be something like, I don't know, CNN, for example, right? Or Yahoo, when it used to be more popular, although still somewhat, especially if you're in the finance space. Premium sites like this, what they're going to do is they're going to negotiate contracts with advertising brands, and typically they will negotiate some sort of fixed rate regardless of actual performance metrics, although again there are exceptions to this, right? It tends to be very good if you're interested in broad audience and if you're interested in awareness, but you're going to give up something in terms of the targeting of the audience. It's going to be typically a broad audience, okay? And because of that, if you're interested in more narrow focus targeting options, maybe this is not your best opportunity. And it tends to be expensive. And expensive, I don't mean if you look at number of impressions, but so if you look at cost, impressions per cost, it might not be too bad, but it's going to be a large budget. Maybe I should say large budget instead of expensive. Okay, good. Other opportunities, advertising networks. Here you have Google Display Network is probably the largest advertising network online, and that's what makes Google so big, right? Financially, this is how Google made most of its money, I should say, not all, but this is the primary revenue source for Google. What is their biggest asset? The biggest asset is that they have a really, really large audience, but because they have such good analytics tools associated with the network and capabilities built in, they give you extremely flexible targeting opportunities, right? Mostly based on audience characteristics, not so much on the context of the pages, right? Because in many of the cases, this is going to be associated with search, for example. Okay, so the nice thing about advertising networks is that you're going to be able to target much narrower audiences. And because of that, if you're a marketer, this is going to give you better opportunities as you move down the funnel of sales. For general advertising, if you're interested in generating basic awareness, this is okay, but maybe it's not the best. But as you move down the funnel, that especially good targeting is going to be more valuable. Then you have advertising exchanges. This is where some of the ad space that has not been filled essentially gets aggregated. And then what these advertising exchanges do is they enable people to bid, like we've talked about keyword bidding when we're talking about SEO, for example, and advertising within search engines. You can also bid for advertising space. And this bidding, instead of being for keywords, is going to be for ad spaces, right? So it's going to be typically more associated with audiences, like I was mentioning before, right? So you're going to be bidding for specific targeting demographic. And when I say demographic, behavioral demographics are also possible in a lot of these large display networks, right? Ad networks. I was thinking Google, but Facebook, for example, has this capability as well, right? Many of the large social media platforms have ad exchanges associated with them. Okay. Now, one thing that enables this is the idea that you don't need to talk one-on-one with a representative. A lot of these ads are actually purchased directly online. So this idea of programmatic buying, where you just go and put on the bids and everything happens automatically without having to discuss anything with a representative. Now, other distribution forms we have already discussed in the past. Social media advertising, again, we've gone through some of the key players here, but the thing that they have going for them, obviously, is the very flexible targeting. And most of them utilize some sort of bidding model, although there are exceptions to this again. And they have the possibility of native advertising. The way this works is with, for example, sponsored posts in feeds that look like one of the pieces that you will expect in the feed, for example, in Facebook, but what you have, it's some sort of sponsored content. So here you have an example, not in a social media platform, but in another platform of native advertising. So here is a publication online that has some of their articles here, right? And something that looks a lot like an article, but it's not, is this sponsored content. So this is native advertising because it looks native to the platform that you're engaging with. So if you're in a social media, it will look like a social media post, for example, right? Or if you are in a publication like Car and Driver, it will look like any other Car and Driver article. But they have a little place here that says sponsored content, so that you know that actually it's advertising, although it looks like a native post. A large way in which you can actually post your advertising, obviously, is going to be mobile, given that most content consumption right now actually is happening in that space. But it goes beyond mobile, right? Gaming consoles and even PCs, if you still play in PC like old-fashioned gamers do. In gaming consoles and video games in general, right, you have opportunities for ad space. This is something that it's been in play for many years. And I think companies are getting smarter and smarter about this because it seems seamless, right? This is like product placement in movies, right? Now, one last technical aspect to discuss in terms of how ads are actually served other than the different distribution networks is this idea of ad servers, right? So typically what all these ad networks will do is they will have a server where all their advertising is actually stored. So they will ask you to upload your digital assets there, right? And once that the server has all that information, what they are going to do is basically store it there, and they will have backups or multiple backups, which is nice. That way you don't have to worry that something happens to your machine and then you're out of digital assets, right? That's one. But two, they will actually serve the right ad at the right time, at the right place, in the right location, right? So they're going to have all these fancy models that are going to enable them to basically call in the right digital assets at the right time so that everything seamlessly integrates, right? And they are going to enable you to also do the tracking. And they provide you with ample data about what happened, right? How many people clicked on it, all the metrics associated with tracking and optimizing, you're going to be able to do with this. So what these ad servers essentially are doing is they are providing consistency in the experience that the user has when they are interacting with whatever digital assets they are interacting. Now, let's discuss some things that you're going to have to consider when you're doing advertising digitally, right? There are going to be a few things that you need to consider. These actual features are kind of like nice things to have that you have online that we have had in advertising for many years, but a lot of this has been automated now. Like, for example, this idea of frequency capping. Now, you need to realize that a lot of the advertisements that we're doing, especially online, they're going to be somewhat intrusive because they are going to stop the natural interaction or natural flow that the consumer or the visitor has. So you might want to cap the frequency of ads because otherwise the user experience is going to be poor. And when they are poor, the user experience poor, they're going to be unhappy. When they are unhappy, guess what? That's going to reflect negatively in the performance of the ad. What else? You are going to also enable sequencing where, for example, you can create a theme, you can create multiple ads under that theme. This is something that Google does very well, for example, right? By requesting multiple images for a single ad campaign. And then it's going to enable you to sequence those ads so that you limit as much as possible advertising where people get bored of the same ad. But if you play multiple ads that are, let's say, consistent thematically with each other, that's going to enable you to reach people more effectively, right? Other thing that different ad networks are going to enable you to do is this idea of exclusivity, which essentially means that, for example, if you're paying for ads and you're, let's say, M&M's, like we were seeing before, that you're not going to have a competing brand that sells candy because you are the exclusive candy partner for whatever location or ad service network you are dealing with. Right, so that's a possibility. Of course, this costs money, doesn't come for free, but if you want to prevent other candy companies from putting their ads right next to yours, and by next meaning, you know, in the next interaction with the site or the app, then this is your opportunity. Roadblocks, this is when you basically limit not only your direct competitors, but everybody else for showing ads in that particular digital space. So essentially you have exclusivity not only in your maybe product category, but just in general, so that, you know, if there are any ads, they're going to be your ads. Again, comes at a price. And then the targeting opportunities online are absolutely phenomenal, right? From, you know, geo-targeting where, you know, depending on where your AP address is, and based on that, your geographical location, then you enable different ad content, different languages, different ad copy, even different themes depending if you have a sophisticated enough campaign, right? Again, the same thing with audience. Any other demographic or behavioral variable can actually be used to provide unique advertising capabilities. I will argue, in my opinion, that these are the things that make digital advertising so successful. That and that it's relatively inexpensive, although the cost has risen over time. And then you can, this is a type of behavioral actually targeting, remarketing, where, for example, somebody who's already been in your website gets actually shown the ad, right? Very popular in some networks. Google knows a little bit about this. So if you're interested, look into double click. And then the idea of contextual advertising. What does this mean? Well, the ads that are shown, not only they are specific to the audience, but they are also specific to the specific task that that person is completing right now. So if I'm at Amazon and I'm looking at, I don't know, a laptop, then if I'm Dell, it will be a lot more valuable to show an ad to that person because they are looking at computers right now, right? So what you're doing by contextual advertising is not only you're targeting the individual based on their behavior demographics, but also the action that they are completing at that time, right? The context where they are already embedded. Okay. Good. And what are the pros and cons? And with this, I'm going to close. Most of this, I think, is common sense, but I'm going to walk you through it anyway. In many ways, they are similar to offline ads, and we've been born with offline ads since we were kids. In fact, some of you with digital ads since you were kids, not my case, right? Because I'm getting old. But they are familiar. We are used to it. We expect the ads, so it's not a surprise, even though we may or we might not like them. It depends on different people. Most people are not very happy about the ads, right? They are easy to understand, right? They have visual appeal. Most of the ads online are beautiful. They have rich media in them, right? They might have animations. They might have, video embedded, right? And from a marketing perspective, they fix one of the biggest problems that marketing has had in history, which is they enable you to track results much easier than offline. What are the downsides? Well, the biggest downside is that, when you are online, your time perception is different, right? You're patient in the real world. When something doesn't work in a computer, you get annoyed really quickly because you expect everything to work quickly, right? So the fact that ads are intrusive and they take space and they move and they do things that you don't want to do in that time means that people tend to get annoyed quicker than they were in real life when things don't work as well, right? So because of that, they have that nature, right? They slow the task that you're trying to complete. And because of that, they're in your way. And they might be seen more of a negative than they will be in an offline world, right? And then finally, like everything else, given that there are ads everywhere, we're getting bored of ads. And because of that, we ignore them. So if you look at click-through rates over the last 10 years, they've been steadily declining and they're pretty low at this point. And that's all I have for you guys today.